Local Edge, powered by Ad Canada Media.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Local Edge. This is where we dive into the heart of local Canadian markets and the people who energize and engage with them. I'm your host, Shauna Randolph. Today, we're going to continue to explore how North American governments are stepping up to support local journalism. In our last episode, we featured the Ontario government's new directive to inject a new life into local media. And today, we're going to look at similar efforts in the United States. So sit back, relax, enjoy our show here on The Local Edge. Joining us is Lori Henson. She is from Rebuild Local News. Lori and her organization have been at the forefront of advocacy for local news, witnessing firsthand the legislative efforts across the U.S. to bolster local media. And today, she's going to help us understand the pivotal developments in different cities and states. And we're also going to talk about what's in the works in the future opportunities that may lay ahead. Great to have you with us here, Lori. And can you start with just giving us an overview of what's been happening in the United States with these government support initiatives for local news?
Yeah, you bet. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and letting me talk about what our organization is doing. We're very proud and excited about the year ahead and what we've already seen happening in the United States. So we are looking for policies to be introduced in about, well, we think up to 20 states, 15 to 20 states. So we have quite a lot of work on our hands in the year ahead. We've seen State House interest in particular explode over the last 5 years. Just to compare, in 2021, there were 7 states that introduced legislation that in some way supported local news. And now, again, we're expecting 15 to 20. So people in state legislatures, lawmakers are recognizing the potential of these kinds of bills to generate real economic support for communities and small businesses, including local news. So we're excited that we've seen the interest in these kinds of policies grow. In particular, we've got states that are considering a number of different kinds of policy approaches. And what Rebuild does is we've developed a policy menu that takes different angles at supporting local news. So that includes things like employment subsidies. So these are newsroom bills that support the newsroom based on the number of journalists that they have on staff. And we are seeing bills take shape in New Mexico, Maryland, Minnesota, and Delaware around that specific kind of policy. There's also an approach around small business advertising, and these are tax credits for small businesses that advertise in local news. And we've got a couple of states that are likely to introduce bills, including Kansas and Kentucky, as well as perhaps South Carolina, all of which are pretty conservative, pretty red states. And so we've seen real bipartisan support for this kind of policy support. There are also what are called platform payment bills, and that includes essentially efforts to create support among big tech for local newsrooms. Those are bills that either levy a fee or a tax on large tech firms to fund programs that benefit local newsrooms. And we've seen those big tech bills introduced in California, New York, Illinois, Arizona, Washington, Maryland, Oregon, and maybe coming up Pennsylvania. So those have become increasingly popular, even though getting them passed and implemented is complicated. We do still see interest in those bills. We also see government advertising bills. This is the area that I manage, and that is an approach where government agencies set aside a portion of their budgets to specifically advertise with local news outlets. And we've seen policies in Illinois and New Jersey pass, and we feel strongly that they will pass, and then others being introduced in Indiana, Connecticut, Minnesota, and Vermont. And we've also seen what we think of as consumer subsidy bills. These are what could be called coupons or vouchers, where public money is used to donate to local newsrooms of their choice. Individuals can use a coupon to subscribe to their local paper or to any news outlet that they want. And we've seen big cities introduce those kinds of ideas, including Washington, D.C. and Seattle. And then we've seen fellowship programs that help local college graduates stay local through subsidizing their work in local newsrooms. We've seen bills be introduced in Nevada, New York, and Maryland, and we expect Colorado and Wisconsin to introduce similar bills. And then grant-making bodies, in organizations that pool money for assistance to struggling newsrooms. And those kinds of programs have passed or been introduced in Wisconsin, Illinois, and San Francisco. So that's quite a list, but that's kind of the overview.
You talked about, very vague, not too vague, I understand that, but new legislation requiring state agencies to boost ad spending in some areas. That's similar to what we saw here announced in Ontario. What are the immediate impacts of that in particular and what you've observed?
Yeah, so in the States, first of all, we're very excited about what Ontario has done because it's a really innovative approach to supporting local news that uses an existing infrastructure. People are already used to the advertising process. It benefits small business. There's an element of familiarity that I think is a real benefit to that kind of approach. And we also saw that be introduced in the States for the first time in New York City. And so they set aside half of that city's advertising budget to support community and ethnic news outlets. And we have great success stories from New York City, which is really a unique media environment. There are many, many dozens of outlets in New York City that make it a unique kind of case. But what we saw is that very small outlets were able to hire additional staff and really increase coverage of communities, a lot of whom are vulnerable and lacking in outreach from government. So that kind of a program in a place like New York City has had a great deal of impact. And so what our goal was to see that model and the Ontario model expand to other places, and especially at the state level. So not just big cities, but statewide government agencies setting aside a portion of their ad budget. And it just makes sense from our perspective that local government would want to support local small business and support the reaching of local communities through the news sources that they trust the most.
Okay, just to make sure we understand the difference here of so much success we're seeing in the United States. What do you feel are the main drivers, the momentum behind these initiatives? What's making this all happen?
Sure. So, there is a great recognition that if local communities are going to be strong, they're going to have to be strengthened by strong local news. We simply can't have good voter participation, competitive elections, accountability for institutions, any of those things without strong local news. And so I think the recognition is in the States that we have to be building healthy communities, and local news is a key component of that. And so I think the reasons behind it are similar in both places.
Let's talk about some challenges. I mean, there's a lot of success here, or triumphs, that have shaped those initiatives there in the States.
We absolutely still have challenges. And so we stay busy addressing, various hurdles that we have to overcome. And so one interesting challenge that's become a real opportunity for us is the realization that at the heart of these policies is the idea of transparency, that we need government to be transparent about how money is being spent. We need agencies and lawmakers to set clear priorities for public resources, and we need to be intentional about where money is being spent. And that's an argument that appeals across, in a bipartisan way across the political spectrum. So in the case of government advertising set-asides like the Ontario policy, and some places that have introduced similar bills in the States, that means laying the foundation of transparency and disclosing where advertising budgets are being spent as a foundation for building anything else on top of it.
Is that something that is a challenge? You see that often, that there is a problem with transparency?
Yeah, so in the policy process, one of the challenges is just making the case at the outset. So if you don't have good data, if we're not able to say this is how much your agencies are spending on advertising, then that's a more difficult story to tell. So we actually broke the policy, the government advertising policy, into two parts. And one is a standalone transparency bill that allows us to simply gather the data. And so as a baseline for then getting a set aside, getting the data has been a challenge and something that we realize is foundational to the process.
Okay. What about other pitfalls that other regions should avoid when they're pushing for this?
Sure. We have been really clear that accountability and oversight has to be central to the design of any policy. There have to be checks and balances. In the case of Chicago, where they are now implementing a mayor's executive order around a government advertising set aside. What that means is that an organization called Public Narrative is building a directory of eligible local news organizations. They're training local publishers to take advantage of the advertising set aside from the city, and making sure that all of that happens in the open. Those are the best practices we've seen, and we're trying to make sure that that happens everywhere.
Are you optimistic there's going to be success with the Chicago executive order, like what we've seen in the New York City model?
I am optimistic. I think, in the case of Chicago, they have it took 2 years of policy work by the Independent Media Alliance there that got the policy, the executive order that was passed. And that was during a prior administration. They're now working with the city under a new administration to get it implemented. And so I think there's a lot of good energy around it. And I think that publishers are excited to up their game, just as they take advantage of the set aside as well.
Let's look ahead now. Your organization, I just want to make sure everybody understands, is very focused on providing policy outlines and potential solutions, representing more than, well, for you in particular, more than 3,000 newsrooms, more than 25,000 journalists with your organization. So what is on tap for 2025 in terms of new policies or expanding others?
Yeah, so 2025, as I said, we expect between 15 and 20 states to introduce legislation. And so we believe that what readers most complain about when it comes to politics, like polarization and ineffectiveness and inefficiency in government, accountability, all of those are addressed by the kinds of policies that we support. But we need to keep making the case we need to keep telling our story, and we need to keep making the case that this is a bipartisan effort. And so with the election results from November, a lot of states shifted in their, leaning either right or left. And so this is going to be a real test for us and an opportunity, we think, to work more in what we would think of as purple or red red states, right? A little more conservative or a little more mixed. We've had some success in more left-leaning states, and now we're excited to continue making progress in the more conservative places.
And so what I'm hearing from you, it doesn't matter whether you're in the United States or Canada, wherever, that it really only takes one publisher to have a really good, heartfelt discussion to convince their representative to bring something forward. It only takes one to table a bill.
Absolutely. I mean, what we are seeing is that the most successful coalitions are the ones that really cast the widest net among types of publishers, including, nonprofit organizations, very small, medium, and large organizations. We have seen coalitions make the most progress when they can make the case with the broadest appeal to lawmakers that these bills are all really about economic development. They're about keeping jobs in communities. They're about being accountable to the public for where money is being spent. And they're about creating healthy communities. And so even though we find that lawmakers sometimes talk a big game about, the media and all of the problems with the media, in fact, they recognize the value of local news and strong local news. And they also need and want strong local news to inform people and their constituents about what they're doing in government. So, a lot of this is just, again, about telling our story effectively and making the case that this is a benefit across the board, regardless of political leaning or type of community.
You have an extensive background as a reporter and journalism instructor. So why, bottom line, do you feel this push to support local news is so important, Lori?
Well, so when I switched my career path away from the classroom at a state college here in the States in Indiana, and started at Rebuild Local News over a year ago, I said it felt like, I finally could stop describing the burning building and finally get my hands on a fire extinguisher, so it feels like this line of work is really the next step in the remaking of journalism and how it's going to be in our world in advanced democracies. We have seen old business models fail. We've seen great innovation happening over the last decade, and it feels really exciting to be part of that innovation and part of that, effort to build something solid and sustainable.
So what do you say to the people you advise? And for our viewers, our listeners here that are also very passionate about supporting local news, what can they do to help push these initiatives in their own communities?
Sure. So one of the really exciting and pretty inspiring parts of my job is to see these coalitions come together and just the networking that happens of, small publishers in particular. They're so busy, and the day-to-day grind of just getting a product out the door, hitting those deadlines every day, multiple times a day, can really grind people down. But when they get together and share their stories and experiences, and they share ideas about what would help them, what you see happen is really great enthusiasm and bonds that form. And so when that includes a coalition of different kinds of organizations, news organizations, different sizes. And they also bring in lawmakers, and they also bring in organizations that are just good government organizations. It's really, there's a lot of power in that. And so it's been great to see even just one person having an idea and getting other people on board, forming a policy working group. That's where all this starts. And so it really is lowercase d democracy at its best, So yes, it's not out of reach, and any place that wants this kind of policy can get it going.
It's a matter of just pushing and not giving up always.
That's right. And it's about making your case to a lawmaker who has the foresight and the pull to get it going. So
Okay.
find a good champion for this kind of a bill. Whatever work you do on the front end to find a good champion will pay off later.
All right. So bottom line, those are the actions you need to ensure the continued revival of local news across North America.
Absolutely.
All right. Lori, thank you so much for your insight. I really appreciate you taking time for our viewers, for our listeners today on The Local Edge.
It's really been a pleasure. And of course, anyone who wants more information about this can visit our website, rebuildlocalnews.org. And we're here to help anybody who wants to get this kind of effort going.
Well, you certainly know what you're talking about, so I think your phone might be ringing. All right, that is Lori Henson. She is Manager of Government Advertising Policy with Rebuild Local News, joining us from Indiana. And that's a wrap, everybody, of our 8th episode this season. Thank you so much for spending time with us today here on The Local Edge. Again, I'm your host, Shawna Randolph. And to stay in tune with us and to access all of our episodes, just be sure to subscribe to the Local Edge podcast. It's on any of the major platforms. You have Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever you use. And don't forget to check out our website, adcanadamedia.ca. Thank you again for joining us here on Local Edge, and see you next time.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, visit our website at road55.ca.